My name is Don K. Preston. I am the president of Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma. Just a thrill to have you with you, and it's a thrill to be with you. Appreciate always hearing from so many of you. And boy, I have heard some absolutely fantastic things from you in appreciation for this series on the resurrection and 1 Corinthians 15. Well, got to get to it because we got some ground to cover. I don't know if I can get everything in that I want to get in today, but we're looking at Paul's comments in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, in which he contrasts the body of corruption with incorruption, mortality, immortality, the vile body versus the body of glory, the natural man versus the spiritual man. The first man, Adam, of the earth, dust. The second man, out of heaven. The first man, a living soul. The second man, a life-giving spirit. Now, I shared with you that in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, 49, that if we take the Greek tenses seriously, Paul says, as we have borne, aorist tense, past tense, as we have borne the image of the first man, as we have borne the image of the earthy, so shall we also bear the image of the heavenly man. Okay, now I pointed out to you that it might be sort of, kind of, technically, maybe, potentially possible that Paul's using the aorist just as a timeless indicative statement, that man bears the image. Well, he could have used the present active indicative. If Paul's talking about man in a biological body bearing the image of the man of dust, it would have been a whole lot easier, it would have been a whole lot clearer even, if he would have simply said, as we now bear, as we are bearing the image of the man of dust. But he didn't do that. Now, I believe that the Holy Spirit was very careful in his use of the Greek tenses. I believe it's up to us to honor them. And I want to share with you something here that when the very first time I saw this, it was one of those, palm to the head, like, oh my goodness, I've got to make sure this is accurate. In 1 Corinthians 15:49, the majority of Greek texts, the majority of translations say, as we have borne the image of the man of dust, they say, we shall bear. And they put it in the future tense. But guess what, folks? Catch the power of this. The majority of the Greek manuscripts, and according to the critical scholars who work in the Greek manuscripts, not only the majority, but the majority of the very best of the Greek manuscripts, and in the lectionaries and in the church fathers, it is in the subjunctive, not the future. Now, what does that mean? Well, it means that Paul would not be saying, listen to this, he would not be saying, we shall bear. He would be saying, let us bear. What? John A.T. Robertson, in his word pictures of the New Testament, was so troubled by the subjunctive that he found in the Greek manuscripts. Number one, he acknowledged the reality of the subjunctive, but number two, due to his theological presuppositions, due to his theology, he said it simply cannot be possible for us to accept the subjunctive. Well, folks, if the Greek text has the subjunctive, Why is it impossible for us to accept it? Robertson went ahead to say, the reason, he expressed it like this. If we accept the subjunctive, it has Paul saying the exact same thing that he said in Philippians chapter 3, that it was his desire and his intent to be made conformable to the death of Christ in order that he might, subjunctive, know the power of his resurrection. In other words, participation in the resurrection of Christ would be dependent on man doing something. Wait a minute. If the resurrection is an end-of-time, earth-burning, cosmos-destroying event in which by the fiat decree of God that is over in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, in which every dead person who has ever lived throughout time will, regardless of whether or not they want to, regardless of whether or not they're striving for it, but they're going to be resurrected, we are told. But wait a minute. The subjunctive falsifies that. And oh, by the way, the New International Greek Testament Commentary likewise points out that the subjunctive is the better attested word or tense. Gordon Fee, one of the most renowned modern scholars, struggles with this and acknowledges the manuscript evidence, and as a matter of fact, he chides the translational committees for, quote, dropping the ball, unquote, and putting in the future tense instead of the better attested, better validated subjunctive. Now, if we accept, which I think we should, and oh, by the way, this is just a tiny, I hadn't even begun to cite the sources that could be cited in support of the subjunctive. So if we accept the subjunctive, as we have borne, let us bear, then it places emphasis on the aorist, and it takes on its power, and it shows that Paul, transitional period of time between bearing the image of the first man and not yet bearing the full image of Christ, but urging his audience to do what? Let us bear the image of Christ. This then becomes a moral paranesis, a moral exhortation. And oh, by the way, that fits perfectly with 1 Corinthians 15:33, where Paul says, do not be deceived. Evil communications corrupt good morals. A moral paranesis right there in the midst of Paul's discussion of resurrection. Live your lives this way in light of what is coming, in order that you might participate in the resurrection. It makes this resurrection that Paul is talking about a, quote, conditional, quote, optional reality based upon the realm in which they would be found. Oh, you are not in the flesh, but in the Spirit. The natural man does not receive the things of God. He cannot know them. They're foolishness to him. The spiritual man understands. The natural man versus spiritual. Body of shame versus body of glory. I'll show you from Ephesians, I'll show you from Colossians. In Paul's continuing discussion of the old man First man, the image of Adam, versus the image of Christ, how it fits his discussion of the resurrection, quote, body, unquote, in 1 Corinthians, demonstrating even further that Paul was not focused on biology. He was not focused on physical substance, but he was focused on relationship, standing before God or not standing before God. The natural man living in the flesh, which can never please God. The spiritual man living in the life directed by the Spirit. You don't want to miss this discussion. It has such a tremendous bearing on our understanding of Paul's doctrine of resurrection in 1 Corinthians 15.